Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name's Jen with Sloat Garden Center. Welcome to our webinar with Taylor Pochron on Tillandsia 101. So Tillandsias are those fun air plant things that we see indoors and in vases and on mantles and stuff like that. And so Taylor's gonna help us, help teach us how to take care of them. And so we're really excited to have him here. Wanted to let you know that we only have one more class for this year, and it's going to be me. And I'm going to do terrariums next week. So terrariums are great because they're really good for gifts. They're kind of like living ornaments. And so they're fun for the holidays. So I'm going to do that next Saturday at 10 a.m. And then I wanted to share that I'm super excited about the lineup so far next year. I've been working really hard on it. And at first I was kind of worried about, you know, if we find fun content having gone through a year already. And turns out, yeah, there's a lot more fun topics that we can do. And so I just thought, you know, I'll let you know a few topics to start, just so you have a preview. So I have seed starting. And then I also have making seed balls with kids. So learning how to create seed, which I think is going to be a fun activity in January. And then lots of organic rose care, organic houseplant care. So doing some different topics, and I'm super excited about it. Taylor's outline and supply list, you should have received about an hour ago. If for some reason you didn't get that, let me know and I'm happy to send you the link. This will probably run about 45 minutes or so. If you have any questions, feel free to feed them into the Q&A. We'll take a couple questions here and there during the presentation, but we're going to reserve the majority of them towards the end of the presentation. So I'm going to turn it over to Taylor. Let's get going. And thanks so much for joining us, everyone.
Hey, yes, thank you, Jen. I'm really excited today. We're talking about Tillandsias and air plants, which are one of those plants that are very specialized and very specific, but really cool. And everyone kind of has different experiences with them. So I was really excited to let Jen know that I wanted to just talk about them because although, you know, I can't be a perfect expert or I'm not a grower of them or anything like that, I am an enthusiast and I have many of them. And I love taking care of them. And I also really like talking about them with guests that come into our stores. So it is something I'm excited to let you guys know about, especially if you have questions about it or if you have something that maybe I said a little bit quickly or you want to know a little more about it. Just type into the Q&A. We'll go over some of the stuff at the end, but I'm just going to go through, like on my outline, just some basic care tips, going from light to water to temperature to all different kinds of things that can either go right or go wrong when you're taking care of Tillandsias. So maybe it gives you a little head start into the season. And also maybe if you're looking to give gifts to people at this time of the year, these are great, fun little plant gifts that are pretty easy to take care of. And they look really cool. And so you can kind of give them a little bit of a heads up on how to take care of them or point them towards this video if you're interested. So first, I want to kind of give a little overview and talk about what is a Tillandsia or what is an air plant. I know in the name it says air plant. I definitely have people coming into our locations and they will ask me, so all it needs is air? And the first answer is no, it's still a plant. And so it needs light, it needs water, it needs all those kinds of things. The main thing is that it grows not in soil, it grows on trees. It's an epiphyte. It actually grows on locations. I mean, it can even grow on poles or wires or all these different places throughout the urban and forest areas, but they generally grow on trees or on cactuses or on these really cool areas like on top of plants. They're not parasitic, so they're not something that's going to be taking nutrients from the host plant or whatever they're growing on. They are just a symbiotic, or they're just kind of there. They're on top of that plant or wherever they are growing and kind of living their life, taking in nutrients and water from the air. So The plants that we're going to be talking about today, like we said before, are Tillandsias, and Tillandsias are in the Bromeliad family. Bromeliads are all the different kinds of beautiful plants that have, when you go into a store looking for bromeliad, this is what you're going to probably end up finding, something that has these kind of really nice green foliages, some cool inflorescence on top. But this is not the plant we're going to be talking about today because they are a little bit semi-terrestrial and they're not fully an air plant. So let's go into actually the Tillandsias. So these are plants that have amazing little structures. They come in so many different varieties. There are hundreds of them, I'm sure. I don't know all their names. I don't know most of their names. There's too many of them. But we have all the different kinds that have longer kind of forms. There are some that are more, that are a little more tubular, or they have this kind of like stretch structure, but definitely more floret-like. And then there are ones that are, of course, a little bit more smaller, and there's kind of like a little flower coming out. So there are many different types. There's even more than that. I kind of want to just give you, maybe when you're looking at our displays or you're going to a new store and you see a big wall of Tillandsias, what are you actually looking at and what are you going to choose when you do so? So the main thing is look at the colors. And I know the colors are all going to be fairly similar. You can see any around me, they are ranging from different kinds of greens, kind of darker greens that are a little bit maybe shinier, to more silvers, and all in between. So the main coloration of Tillandsias are like pale green to a light silver. And that actually comes from the structure that's on top of them. They have trichomes, which you may have heard of before if you have taken care of many kinds of plants that have fuzzier bits. So these are like the little bits, just kind of hold it there for a second. They're the little parts of the plant that are fuzzier and shinier. They have these structures that almost have a velvet kind of structure to them. Really cool. These are the trichomes. And so these are the little kind of hairs or scaly bits that are on these plants that actually are absorbing a lot of the water and the nutrients that these plants will be taking in. So it's a really important structure on them. And they all have different amounts of them and different levels. So if you are looking at your plant and you see lots of silver and lots of little kind of hairs on it, let me give you an example. One of my favorite Tillandsias is the Tectorum. See if I can get the focus. The Tectorums are these very, very fuzzy ones right here. They have nice hairs going all throughout it. And these kinds of structures are actually, again, the trichomes that are a little bit more exaggerated. What it's going to do is actually going to take in the water and the nutrients from the air and hold it in the plant a little bit better. So the ones that have a very, very strong structure like this are going to be a little bit more on the higher light and lower water compared to the ones that maybe have a little bit more of a green and going further to a more green area. So we're going to talk about all those kinds of stuff really fast. But I wanted to give you a heads up that when you go and look at the different plants, the actual kind of formations and structures that they are made up of mean a lot for their actual care. The really nice thing about that, though, is they're very versatile. So these plants are actually able to grow in lots of different kinds of situations. And I've been doing a fair bit of research on just like the different kinds of care that people recommend for Tillandsias. And for the most part, everything is very similar. But what I find very different is everyone's idea of how to water them and how long to water them and how much to water them. And what actually that's more telling me is that they can kind of adapt and work with the different kinds of watering schedules that we give them. And they really work with different kinds of amounts of water. But some maybe will do better with certain kinds of care than others that we're going to go over today. So let's talk about first light. Light is a great one to start with because that really sets the location and the place that you're going to be putting your air plants and your other kinds of plants, any plants you have. Looking at your light levels, I am fortunately in a room that is fairly bright. It is a south-facing and east-facing room, so I get a lot of sun in here, so it's usually pretty bright, and I have a lot of windows. So I am able to grow a fair bit of these plants in a very bright spot, and they really like a bright, fairly diffused light if you can give it to them. What diffused means is either a very light shade, or you have a tree that kind of blocks some of the light, or maybe it's getting blocked by some of your other plants, or it's not getting a full direct sun all day. A little bit of diffused light is good for them because it's not super intense on them, but the light being very bright is pretty important. Like I was saying before, the ones that I have a more silvery kind of look. So I think the name of this one is Tillandsia TI. Really cool kind of structure, has a really interesting look to it. And you can see it's very silver. It has lots of trichomes all over it. And what that's telling me is that this plant, compared to some of the other ones, would like a brighter spot, maybe even a little bit of direct sunlight, but not too much. You can definitely watch the plant as it grows and see how that affects it. But it's going to want a little bit more bright light. It's gonna love some airflow and everything, but it can be somewhere near your windows compared to some of these other ones that I have here. So you can kind of see they don't have as much silver. They have a kind of more slick feel to them. And I can't really feel very many trichomes at all, so they're very small. And these ones are a little bit more on the tropical side. So the plants that are a little bit more in the green tend to be liking a little bit more shade, maybe a little bit more water. They're plants that probably are more endemic to spaces that are like rainforests or places that get a lot of water pretty often, and they don't have to have these strong trichomal structures that have to hold all this water in, compared to some of the other silver ones I was just talking about, or maybe grown in more like desert regions or regions on cactuses that actually maybe don't get very much sun or very much light. They get a lot of light, but not very much water. And so there's a different time of the year that they get a lot of water. Maybe it's kind of like the desert where monsoons hit and everything gets really wet for a couple of days and then it dries out again. They can actually handle that compared to some of these that have a little more of the green structure, maybe need a little bit more water. So it's kind of something to think about when you pick these up to give them the care that they need for them to actually grow really well in your location. The other thing is if you're going to put anything on like your mantelpiece, or you have it by your bedside or anywhere within your house, if you have a dimmer, darker space, you can try and go for some of the more greener structured ones. But it is always good to know that they do need a fair bit of light. And so if they are in a dark location, they're not going to survive for too long there. The nice thing about them is they're a very sturdy plant. So you can have it anywhere in your house for around a month or so with lower light, and it usually will be okay in that spot for a good while. It'll look like it looks when you bought it in the store, but if you keep it there for multiple months after that period of time, it's probably going to slowly decline, slowly degrade. A lot of times when plants have less light, they stretch. We've all seen this in succulents and other plants. They kind of stretch out a little bit. They get a little more pale. Air plants are very similar. They're slow growing, so it's hard to see that change very fast. But the thing about them is if they grow in that space for too long, they're going to get a little bit bad. So I just want to show off some more of these different kinds of structures. Some are softer, some are harder. This one's a little more rigid. There's a lot of different kinds of structures and different kinds of plants you can get, which really makes it kind of fun to take care of them. Okay, now let us also talk about watering. So watering is a really important step for plants, of course, because everything needs water to survive. We all need water to survive. All animals need water to survive, and plants do as well. And air plants are no exception. They, like I was saying before, some of the structures take in water easier. Some of them they don't need as much. But the best thing I recommend when watering these kinds of plants is to go through the dunking method. I have many sprayers. Of different kinds of varieties. We sell them all in our stores. You have these kinds, as well as the little spray bottles, as well as even the largest one, this kind. So these are spray bottles that you can use to mist your plants, increase the humidity, all these kinds of sprayers are something that you can give them water throughout the week or give them a little bit of water in there. So every days, my headphones are actually cutting out again. Let me know if that happens.
Yeah, you just cut out right when it said how often you're watering.
Okay.
You get a longer lifespan.
Ah, there we go. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Sorry,
So
if it
how
sounds
often?
a little bit worse.
No, it's fine.
Okay. The structures that we're talking about watering. So we have these kind of water bottles. It is something that you should water your plants. And like I said, everyone kind of approaches this a little bit differently. If you're spraying your plants, you want to do it fairly often, about 2 to 3 times a week. Some people say every day. Some people say only a couple times a week. It depends on the type of Tillandsia you have, as well as maybe how much you're dousing them. But you have these water bottles that you can spray your plants every once in a while to kind of keep up the humidity, let them absorb that moisture. But to keep them nice and healthy and growing strong and growing well throughout the season, it is a good idea to actually use some sort of dunking method. We all have bowls in our house. We have these tough totes at slopes. They're kind of cool. They actually can bend, and it's really easy to pour water out of them. I use them a lot in my gardening, but I've also used them for dunking my Tillandsias. So I have these 2 Tillandsias right here. I wanted to show off because last night, as I was going around and collecting all my plants to show off today, I found these 2. And it's maybe a little bit hard to see, but they were in the same exact state last night. They were very, very dry. If you look at this one right here, all the leaves are curling in. That is the biggest sign that your Tillandsia is thirsty and dry, is when your leaves start to kind of curl up and almost form little circles. That is pretty far gone, to be honest. I have very underwatered this plant. I would, like I said, suggest maybe once a week or so. But honestly, I think this one went about 3 to 4 weeks maybe without any water. I had it on a little display. Actually, I think I had it on the very top of a moss pole that I had attached to, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And I just didn't really think about it. Maybe I sprayed it once in a while and just kind of let it be. And I found yesterday it was very, very dry. This one was right next to it. I got them at the same time. And I dunked this one last night into some water. So just putting it inside the water and let it sit there for, I let it sit there for about 5 minutes. I think between 30 seconds and 10 minutes is it's like a long period of time difference. But if you want your plant to really hydrate up and soak in a bunch of nutrients, on the 10-minute kind of side is a really good way to give it a lot of water so it can really soak it up. Or if you're doing your dunking method, once a week instead of spraying, and you want to do it more often, just a couple of seconds inside the water will get it a good amount of water to soak it up, and then it can dry away. So I soaked this one last night for about 5 minutes or so, and then put it on my counter to let it dry. And I seen this morning, all of the leaves totally opened up a lot more. They looked exactly the same last night. I actually even took a picture of them so I can post on my Instagram or something later on, but they looked exactly the same. I did this kind of formation and it was very homogeneous, but this one now after being watered really opened up, and I wanted to show the difference of when it's able to be hydrated, the leaves kind of open up like this a little bit more, and so they can take in more sunlight. They're happier like that. When they're dry, all their cells get pulled together, and then they get kind of small like that. So I'm going to actually water this one right now, dropping it into my container. Nothing too special. You just kind of let it float there for a second. I usually do it upside down. It's not really that needed, but I find that if you put the plant upside down, you're not getting so much water around the hold fast or the root system. That is probably the easiest way to get a plant to rot out, is have their root system get too moist and too wet. And then the structure that's actually holding all those bottom leaves kind of decays away, and then the Tillandsia kind of falls apart. So whenever I talk to someone and they say that all their Tillandsias are are rotting away because they're too hard, they don't know how to water them, they're rotting away. I find that the biggest issue is probably their root system or their holdfast being too wet for too long. And that often happens from how you display them. If you actually have them sitting on soil or sitting in a bowl, but you're watering the plant and it has a little bit of water at the bottom of the bowl. If they're sitting in the water, it's a really easy way to root out, to rot away the bottom of your root system. As well as if you have it in too little light, again, going back to the light situation, if it's very, very dim or not a very good lighting situation, you will have a weaker growth. And a lot of times it's way easier for the plant not to dry out completely. And that's how they can rot away. So if you're ever having trouble with rotting, we're going to talk about some more of that later on if you have some troubleshooting. If you ever have a problem with your plants kind of disintegrating on you or falling apart, it's often a too little light and maybe too much water on the bottom of it.
Taylor, I had a question.
Yeah.
So if you're just putting them like head first into the water, basically, I mean, is the plant taking in water through the leaves, or like when you turn it back up, is the water going down into the plant, or like how's it getting the water?
That's a great question. A good segue for watering. So if you look at a Tillandsia, like I said, you have the trichomal structure on top on all of the leaves, and then you have a structure on the bottom that is your holdfast or your root system. Tillandsias are special compared to other plants because their roots are really only there for structural support or holding on to whatever they're growing onto. So a Tillandsia's root system is not there to uptake nutrients or water. I think it probably can do it slightly, but in general, it is really, they're harder, they're smaller structures that are actually just there to grab onto and hold onto their rocks or their bark or whatever they're holding onto. And all of the water and all the nutrient uptake pretty much comes from their leaf system. And that's why I'm saying you really want to get the leaves wet on these ones. Now, most plants aren't really like this. I mean, some can take up water through their leaves, but Tillandsias are all through their leaf system. So you want to make sure you get your leaves completely hydrated and not worry too much about your root system. That's not where you're watering. Right?
That's awesome. I never knew that. I'm learning.
Yeah.
I'm learning so much, actually. Trichomes too. Never knew that. So super awesome.
There's even like these ones, these very different style. They're very rounded. They're rigid. You can even tell they don't really have that kind of root system on them. It's been probably taken off because a lot of these are grown through propagation and through multiplication. They're grown through multiple pups growing out and then separating them apart. So let me show you that too, because I think it's a really interesting kind of thing about them. I have this plant right here. I showed it earlier. I wish I knew the name of the species, but it's a really pretty Tillandsia. It has a very bulbous kind of look to it. It has a lot of trichomes. I had it sitting in my window on top of my cactus for about a year and a half, and I really didn't pay attention to it. I watered over it to water my cactus every once in a while. Maybe not the like best method, but it seemed to work out for this situation. It got enough water. It does have a pretty big root system, but it's not really doing anything. If it would be on a rock or something, it would be attached to that rock, but it's just kind of a little root system on the bottom. But really this plant was just one. So it was just this one when I got it. It was a little bit smaller and it had just the starting of a flower. So this flowered right here. We can definitely talk about flowers if you have questions about it. So this flowered a little while ago and then it was blue. I think it was purple and it was really pretty and it bloomed for a good while. And then it slowly kind of died away. I kept a little flower spike on it because honestly, I kind of like how it looks. And I just let the plant sit there for a little while. And as it grew and as it just got watered every once in a while, it grew this whole side shoot, which is called its pup. So Tillandsias, they propagate and they grow by having their main stalk flower usually. And then at that point, they start growing pups. And so they actually will multiply, get more and more of them. This was a great example because honestly, I didn't even know the second one was here until last night. I picked it up and I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. And if you wanted to, I'm not gonna do it right now because I kind of like it connected. You can separate them right in between and pull them apart. And that's how you get two plants. And you can kind of keep on growing your collection. But I like kind of keeping them in little clusters. I have a bunch of them that are in clusters and you can kind of see this is a triplet right here that grew out of each other. So it is 3 little Tillandsias. I believe the variety is the Ionanthus. It is probably the most common one that you find. All the Tillandsias that look like this, you see them all over the place. Sometimes they have color on them and sometimes they don't. This is the Ionanthus. It's a really common one. And I find that these are probably the easiest ones to take care of, which is nice because they're the most prolific and they're most around for us to purchase, but they're probably the easiest ones to take care of. They last for a long time. And if you underwater them, they tend to do okay. I've actually had a couple of them, like I said before, where I didn't water them for almost a month or so, which is not recommended, but the plant survived. The leaves were still totally fine. The top leaves are nice and healthy, not really any brown parts on it. The bottom leaves did brown away and die off a little bit, but that's to be expected when you don't really water them enough. So these are the ones that I would recommend if you were just giving a beginner one to a friend, or if you want to get a beginner Tillandsia, go for the Ionanthus. These really pretty little structures. And then if you want to give them something a little bit special, I always recommend the Tectorum. Again, it is my favorite. And like I was talking about before, being so covered in really fuzzy trichomes, it is able to hold its water better than any other Tillandsia I've had. I've been able to not really water these as much as I probably should have, and they have not changed very much. They're probably the slowest growing though. So some of these really silvery ones that are very sturdy are a lot slower to grow, which is totally fine. But if you're looking for a plant to really expand and grow fast, then maybe it's not the one to go for.
Taylor, it's kind of hard to see on the camera, but I just want everyone to know, like, that is like really soft. Like it's got a ton.
Yeah.
How would you describe it? I mean, it's definitely, you can, yeah. If you can hold it still, maybe, yeah. But it's covered in all these tiny, it's almost like a Q-tip in a way. You know, it's got that like fuzz, like all over the
very
leaf.
Fuzzy, very interesting little plant. So I have it sitting, we'll talk about a little bit of this display. I have it sitting on a little turtle. We sell these at Sloat and they're really cute, a little planter. I find that they don't have a hole in the bottom, so I don't like planting them too much, but it's a great little display for a hair planter, a little Tillandsia to sit on top of. So I have this sitting in my room. It's one of my favorite ones to look at every day. So it's definitely a cool one. So in general, we've gone over just some ideas of light and water. I wanted to show off another plant that I did underwater as well. Sorry to say, everyone, but it does happen, and there is ways to fix it. This is a nice big large one that you can see again. All of its leaf structures are curled up. It's a little bit sad. They're not dying away too much. I definitely still have a bottom crown that is held together because it's getting enough sun, but it really was underwatered for a good while. I was going to water about 2 days ago, and I thought, I'll wait. I'll show it to everyone just to give it as a lesson of what maybe not to do. But this is one that's been very, very wet. Let me putting it into my watering bucket. Like I said, pretty much upside down. Still on the floor. Pretty much upside down. Let the leaves completely hydrate up, and probably by the end of this talk, I'll be pulling it out and putting it back onto my counterpiece or my counter area. So in general, those are some watering tips. Like I said, you can use a spray bottle quite often to increase your humidity. If you're going to be really watering them for a long period of time or taking care of them for a long period of time, I suggest doing some sort of dunking method about once a week. You can definitely prolong that with some of your plants that hold their water a little bit better, and maybe do that every week and a half to 2 weeks. And some of the ones that are maybe a little bit on the lighter side or on the greener side, or dry out a little bit faster, doing it maybe every twice a week. It seems like a little bit of a chore, but it's a nice little bounce time you can have with your plants. You really get to look at them and check them out and see how they grow, and check on the little pups and do all those kinds of things when you're watering them. So it's a good kind of method to get in the habit of, especially when you have these plants. I also, where are we going to go to next? Wanted to mention fertilizers, because I know I'm going to get lots of questions about fertilizer. These are plants that actually don't need too much fertilizer. They get a lot of nutrients from the air and from the water that they're given. If the water is not completely void of minerals and stuff, like if it's not completely a distilled water, usually you can get a fair bit of nutrients from that. If it's outside in the rain, we're going to talk a little bit about outside Tillandsias just here in a second. They actually get a lot of nutrients from natural rainwater. It's a really good source for them, and so they can pretty much survive mostly on that. But when you have these plants and you have them for a while, especially in your home, you want to give them a little bit of an edge and let them grow nice and strong. Using a fertilizer is a good idea. There are lots of fertilizers on the market that are specialized for Tillandsias. Epiphyte's Delight, and there's little Tillandsia spray bottles. Everyone kind of has their own little mix. The ones that we have at our store that I usually recommend to people are the orchid fertilizer, which I know kind of sounds weird that I'm suggesting an orchid fertilizer for an air plant, but the nice thing is a lot of us have orchid fertilizers at our home because we take care of many orchids. A lot of us take care of orchids, and these fertilizers don't have urea. So urea free is probably the most important thing. The Tillandsia or the air plant, that urea actually is a little bit of a damaging substance to their structure. And so if you have a very high urea or even calcium and a few other kinds of minerals that are in your fertilizer, if it's a little bit high, it can kind of damage them over time. So that's why I tend to recommend this one, also because a lot of my guests already have it at home. So it's something that they can use for both their orchids or their air plants. Same here, another fertilizer that we've been bringing into our stores is by the Dynagrow company, the Orchid Pro and the Foliage Pro. Both, I was checking their fertilizer or their ingredients, both good for air plants. They don't have the urea in them. And so mixing just a little bit of this, just a little bit into your water. You don't want to change your water color. You don't want to add a whole bunch. You don't want to add a whole spoonful. You just want to add maybe a few little pinches of it to your water and just kind of mix it around. That will add just enough nutrients for the plant to be able to uptake and get a little bit into their cells, give them a little bit of growth power, and they'll grow a little bit stronger. But you don't want to overload them because these plants take everything in through their leaves. And so if you're covering their leaves with all these different kinds of minerals and chemicals and all these kinds of things, and they're just sitting there, it's really easy for those to kind of bog up and close all of their photoreceptive centers, all the places where they take in light and they take in water. So you want to keep those nice and clean. It's always good to kind of wash them, but a little bit of fertilizer now and then will give you a good growth. So if you ever have questions about fertilizers and stuff, we have a lot of information at our stores. Our staff is pretty well knowledgeable about that. So it's always something good to come in and talk about, especially about your specific plants. Every plant's a little bit different and everything needs a little bit of different kinds of fertilizer. So yeah, just kind of giving a little tip on that. But in general, they don't need so much of it, which also makes them one of those easier plants to take care of because you're not worried about a consistent, rigorous fertilizing schedule. Okay, I also really want to show off some of these larger ones I have around me because I haven't done it yet. I don't own these, and so I brought them from the store, but I thought it would be so fascinating to show off really what Tillandsias actually can also become. There are huge ones in the wild. I've been showing lots of little ones because that's mostly what people will be growing in their homes and their locations. But there's also these huge ones that grow in the wild. So these ones in their natural locations, again, are outdoors. They grow on their side. So they grow on trees kind of this direction. These plants don't grow upright like a basic kind of flower plant that you would normally see. They grow sideways. And then they even have, this one has this large inflorescence coming out of it, which is where it's going to be flowering pretty soon. And the flower is going to be sticking up. So all the little, the bugs and all its pollinators can come in and taste the flowers. And then this plant actually has this structure that is almost cascading downwards. So when the water comes and hits the plant, it fills up all of its little cells and all of its pores, and then drains out and slips down the tree or wherever it's hanging. And that allows the plant to dry out naturally. When you're watering your plants, and you give them a good amount of water, you don't want them to be sitting in that water. You don't want the water to be sitting inside their little cups or their cells. You want it to dry away and leave the location. Everything that it uptakes while it was getting water is what it's going to be using, but all the water that's on the surface doesn't really need to be there, and that can actually cause some rotting. So I've even had people suggest that after you water your plants, lay them all on the table, and if you have a fan, run a little fan, a light breeze over them to give them a good dry. And they actually seem to really enjoy an extra bit of wind pressure to help dry them out before they're able to sit there with the water that you gave them. That's a little tip right there. And like I was talking about this one, I also wanted to recommend bringing your air plants into your outdoor location. So it sometimes is hard, or you can get lost, these little plants inside your garden. But if you have interesting little plants or pots or some kind of structural trees, and you want to give them a little bit of a friend to grow on them, you can put these air plants on your trees in containers. You can mount them onto the different kinds of woods or barks. So using mounting structures. So we have like Tilly Tacker, or there is E3 3600, which is a type of glue, so you can glue them to locations. I also always recommend, I like using wire for my Tillandsias. So I know it's kind of hard to see, but I make these little wire structures out of a bonsai wire or a Tillandsia wire. And I'm able to take my Tillandsia and just kind of move the wire through it, and it holds it in place like a natural little root system. And then I'm able to stick this on plants, or I have moss poles behind me that I'm able to actually stick the Tillandsias onto with these little wire structures. I'll even show you. I just pulled this right off of my moss pole. It's another Tectorum, another little fuzzy one, and it has that wire going through it that actually is holding it in place. And so I'm able to take it off, give it a water, or put in some water and let it soak it up, and then put it right back onto a moss pole. So this is kind of going into a little bit more of like how you can display your plants in your house. You can definitely have them sitting on your counter. You can have them sitting on top of a little pot or some sort of kind of structure or a cup. You can have them hanging on the wall on different kinds of barks, either using glue or maybe wiring them in, or using fishing line to tie them in, or even have like a structure that you can actually put them onto, like a moss pole or something like that. So I have them all throughout my room. I have them on top of other plants. So they can really be a versatile element that adds a little interest around your other plants, that someone, maybe when they're going through and looking at all your plants in your room, they can be like, oh, look at all these little ones. Is this the flower? No, it's actually just a Tillandsia sitting on my ficus. So they're pretty fun to display and work around with like that. And then, like I said, they do so well outdoors. I have another plant I'm going to show you right now.
Taylor, is there some kind of rule that you would say, like in terms of displaying the Tillandsias? Like, do you, like, one guest was asking, can I put this on a basket, and the basket is holding a plant? You know what I mean? Like, is there any sort of materials that you want to be sure that it's not? I mean, we don't want them to touch soil.
Exactly, yeah. So
that would be the biggest thing, right?
The biggest rule is to not have the root system completely covered or inside a substance that's going to be wet for a long period of time. Right. Soil holds onto moisture. I mean, even sometimes putting it on top of mosses, if you have the moss always holding a lot of moisture, that can definitely rot out the bottom. So I think that's the biggest rule, is to not have the root system inside soil or inside something that's going to hold a lot of water. Mm-hmm. I think you can kind of do whatever you really want where you put it. You want to be careful of your light. So either too dim, or if it's very too bright, that can cause them to dry out a little bit faster. So putting it where you're putting it is definitely important. What you're putting it on is not so important, as long as it's somehow attached. If you can just tie them up to a little branch, that's totally fine. If you want to put it on a basket, that's definitely fine. But if you're going to be putting it in anything, just make sure that the bottom of it is not sitting in any kind of water.
I don't want a spoiler, but are you going to show your wreath?
Yeah, I can do that even.
Because, yeah, because this is
one.
like perfect for this time of year too, right? For the holidays.
Exactly, yeah. Let us do that, because I think the first class, so these classes didn't always used to be online. They were in the stores. And the first class that I took with Jen, she was hosting a Tillandsia wreath making webinar. We made really cool Tillandsia wreaths. I think this was maybe the second or third year I did it with you because I really enjoyed that class. So I always wanted to be part of it. And I remember making these. We had these grape leaf or grapevine kind of wreaths that we got from, I believe, like somewhere, the flower mart or something. And we were able to wire in and glue on all these different kinds of mosses and little structures. This is even a Christmas tree. It's kind of hard to see, I know. But this kind of brown structure is from my old Christmas tree that I was able to cut off little branches and wilt stop it. It's still here. There's even some cedar branches that were from 2 years ago. And although they're dried out, they're actually holding strong and still on this structure. But I was able to wire in and glue on all these little Tillandsias, and they've been doing pretty well. I had 1 or 2 losses. There's a little dry one over here. But all these little ones, the Ionanthus ones, they did so well on this wreath, even with my kind of lack of watering it sometimes. And I was able to hang this on my wall. So they're a really fun way to display them. I find that these kind of wreaths do really well.
Yeah, and you could put it on your front door too, like Taylor's saying. You can grow them outside. So
because they can do well outside. They love that extra wind pressure. They like a little bit of air movement. They also like the humidity in the air. I live in a San Francisco location, so we're right by the ocean, and there's a lot of extra humidity in the air. They do great here. I was actually going to go right into some outdoor ones right away, but let's talk about the wreaths really fast. This is one that, sad to say, didn't do so well. I put it in a location, and that's actually one of the other things I was going to talk about. When you put a plant or an air plant in a location that you're not going to look at very often, or you don't really know about, it's very easy for them to go get a little bit too dry or not watered. So I have a couple little air plants on here that's, sad to say, they are dried away. I didn't take this apart just yet because I wanted to show the both sides of the this kind of spectrum of, there's plants that do really well, and I want to show you a really beautiful air plant, but also when they dry away, they look kind of like this. They lose their color. They get very dry and sticky, or like stick-like, not sticky. And they can kind of fall apart. So if you come over to your plants and they just kind of break apart, that is the end of that Tillandsia's life. And so that was probably from some sort of miscare in that sense. And like I said, this wreath was sitting in the corner of a room that I forgot about for far too long, and they ended up not making it. So that can happen, and it's just like a tale of a warning. So just be careful to put plants somewhere that you don't see them. But we're going to talk really fast about outdoor, because we were saying that you can put the wreaths outside, you can hang things outside. I have this wisteria bonsai kind of plant that I've had for many years now. And you can kind of see during parts of the year, there's no leaves on this tree, and I really want it to look kind of cool. So I just started throwing some air plants on it, and they grew in so well. Sorry, I'm spinning it. It's a little bit heavy, so I don't want to hold it. But sitting on this is this nice, huge structure that actually has so many pups on it. All these little connections and different points are all new growth points that have a really pretty kind of opening up structure, but they're all the new pups. They're all new growth. And this has been growing for probably 3 years or so on this plant. And it's doing so well. I have it just sitting on the surface. There's a couple of rocks and bark around the top of my plant. So I just kind of have it sitting it on top. And every time I go and water this plant, I just kind of water over them. And they love the outdoor environment. They really like the high amount of sun that they're getting with the extra water that I can give them. So if you have plants outside, make sure that they're getting enough water if they're in a sunny location, but they do really well in outdoor locations. So again, kind of cool, right? I really like this one.
Super cool. And so do you have, it was hard to see, but do you have some sort of rock or gravel on the top of the soil there?
Yeah.
And so then the Tillandsias are on top? Mm-hmm.
So I have on top of the soil a little bit of rocks. I have let's see, I can actually even pull it off. I have like a little stump that's kind of holding it back. and just kind of making sure that they don't really sit directly into the soil. They can kind of sit on top of it a little bit, and you do risk the rotting at the bottom, but they seem to be doing okay in this location. So it is something that if you want to have them on your outdoor plants, and like I wanted to say, it works out really well. I even have another one that, if you can tell, it is kind of getting a little bit darker. So this is a one that just sits on one of my other plants outside, gets a lot of sun compared to those other ones. And you can tell that the structure, hopefully you can tell, is a little bit darker. It's a little bit hard to see in these, but the darker structure on these leaves means that there's a lot of sun pressure and there's a little bit of sun stress happening. I think it gives it a little bit of nice kind of coloration, but it is showing that the plant is getting a little bit of extra sun. So it's gonna change its chlorophyll, it's gonna change its color to deal with that. And usually it's okay, but if it goes a little bit too far, that's how also you can dry out your plant. So you have to be careful. But I'm just showing that this one's been sitting on a plant for about 4 years now, and I kind of just forget about it and water it when I water that plant, and it seems to work out pretty well. And then lastly, for an outdoor Tillandsia, I have this little one right here. Really pretty light colors, and it actually came off of a flower stalk. So a friend of mine had a huge Tillandsia that flowered in her garden, and she gave me this flower stalk, and all these were attached to it. And so they were just growing from the flower location. So I guess they just had the seeds, or however it was growing, grew off this flower. And then they're actually just sitting again in my garden near my wisteria, and doing quite well in that location, and getting water from rain, getting water from me just kind of going through and watering my garden. So they do really well out there.
Taylor, can you talk a little bit about the flower, and then we can there's a bunch of questions, so I want to be sure that we have time for that. But like, how do you get them to flower, or can you know, how often do they flower and whatnot?
Yeah. So unfortunately, I don't have a lot of examples of flowers right now. We are in the middle of our winter season, and a lot of our Tillandsias are just not flowering at the moment. There are some that are, I'm sure, they're all around. They kind of do it throughout the year, but it is the colder time of the year, and I think there's a little bit less sun, so their flower cycle is not being induced. I have one right here that just shows that it has this little flower stalk on the top of it that is just about to open up, and the flowers are really pretty. They're purple, usually purples and pinks. They're very showy. They come out about, if you're very lucky, around once a year, the Tillandsias will flower. But the thing is, they are like the Bromeliad, where one mother plant will shoot out one flower stalk. And then once that flower stalk is done, it'll last for a couple of months. It'll bloom, it'll be really happy. It'll slowly die back down. And then that mother plant is actually done flowering, and it will start producing pups and babies. So all the pups and babies will then grow for that year or so, and then they will flower. And so it's this kind of cycle of flowering, dying back, growing new, flowering again. You're not going to get a flower from the same plant. You're going to get it from the offspring or the pups of that plant. It's a pretty important thing to know, because a lot of times people will buy a Tillandsia when it's in full bloom or right at the very end of its bloom, because it's very pretty in the store. But it's something good to know that that flower will last for a little while, but it will die back, and that plant that you have won't flower again unless it has some babies or pups on it as well. They're not easy to like cause. You can't really just like force a Tillandsia to flower. Having very good care, so proper amount of sunlight, a nice bright diffused light, regular watering, a little bit of wind flow, like all the good care things that we've been talking about. If you do that for your Tillandsia, it will eventually flower. A little bit of maybe a fertilizer that might have some of the blooming nutrients. Like I have a tap-in bloom right here that has a little bit of like that bloom kind of food in it. Might help it along, but it's not something that you can kind of just force to happen. So giving it a little bit of fertilizer can help it out, but proper care is the best way to get your Tillandsias to flower. And sometimes it just kind of happens. You won't be paying attention for a while, and then you'll look back and there's a little flower forming. So it's something that's going to be a surprise and a little bit of excitement every time you look at them. I definitely would love to go over some care and some troubleshooting while you look at those questions. I think the one last thing that I know a lot of people will ask about, or maybe want to know about, or maybe nervous to ask about, is what are the pests that affect the Tillandsia? And so luckily, and I'm really happy to say this, they are very, very void of pests and problems. They do not really get hit by aphids. They don't really get hit by spider mites or all those kinds of other household pests that we have. It's possible, especially if they're sitting on a plant or next to a plant that has that problem, for them to be crawling over them. But these structures are very rigid, and they're not really pumping a lot of water all around. There's not a lot of nutrients kind of like readily available or as smelling good to these kinds of pests. So you're not actually going to get any bugs on your Tillandsias, which is really great for someone who maybe doesn't want to deal with bugs, because they're definitely something that happens on houseplants. But if you don't want to deal with those ever, they're a great plant to start with. But yeah, do you have some questions I can go over and start riffing?
Awesome. I mean, you've covered a ton. I've learned so much. Okay. So when I sent out your outline and your supply list, I also did a link to our Tillandsia care sheet. And there is a recommendation on our care sheet that it's best to use bottled water. Do you do that, or do you? Oh, okay.
It's actually something I was going to talk about with watering, so I really appreciate you bringing it back up. Mm-hmm. So Tillandsias are, like I said before, they have those structures on their leaves that take in and absorb the water, the trichomes and the little hairs on there. They can easily get bogged down by those harder minerals and stuff. So the nice thing is bottled water or purified water that went through like a air filter or a water filter, or anything that maybe even like rainwater that has maybe a little bit of nutrients in it, maybe a little bit of salts or some sort of chemicals that are just natural ingredients that are just in our water or in our air that we take in, is totally fine to go on top of a Tillandsia. But if you have a water system, like your pumps or your water that you get into your house, your tap water is considered like a hard water. If it's very alkaline, or it has a lot of like calciums and those kinds of minerals in it, if you're using that too much, it's really easy for that to bog down all those little structures on the tips of the leaves, and that can cause the plant to get brown tips or die back or just kind of kick it all together. So if you're using too much hard water, then that can be a problem. I've been reading a bunch on the Tillandsias, and people always recommend good water, which is just a water that is relatively filtered, maybe with some little microbes in it or little nutrients or little minerals, but not a lot of it, and not super alkaline. I think water bottle is a good use of that, or I use a little water purifier that I would drink out of normally, and I pour that into a bowl.
Yeah, I actually didn't realize how significant it can be when I moved from San Francisco to Marin. San Francisco water is more acidic than Marin water, and we learned that quickly with our carnivorous plants. And so it would be kind of the same, it's like, I guess you don't know. I don't know what East Bay water is like, if it's more acidic or whatnot, but that's something to pay attention to. And like you said, the bottled water just eliminates that, possibility of hurting them, I guess, right? Or something.
And if you don't want to keep on buying bottled water for your plants as well as for yourself or anything like that, you can definitely
purify,
have some of it poured into like a larger tub that maybe even has a lid, and use that as your like watering tub. So you have their nice water. You can able to dunk your plants every once in a while, put your lid on it so it doesn't evaporate, and maybe store it away, and you can use it again, because you kind of use the same water a couple of times before it gets a little bit bad. So it's good to pay attention to that. And like you said, it's good to evaluate your water situation and what kind of water you have. Generally, they can do okay. They can survive, and they can adapt to what you give them. But if it's pretty filled with, if it's like very cloudy when you pour it out and stuff like that, then letting it settle for a second is always a good idea. Make sure all those like harder nutrient or harder minerals are just not put into this situation.
Okay, another good question. Can you use artificial light for Tillandsias, or do you need natural sunlight?
So you definitely can use artificial light for them, but it's like any other houseplant. You need to have the right intensity and the right kind of light. basic bulbs and stuff in our houses don't have the full spectrum of light for the plants, so they don't give them everything they need. They can kind of survive, they can keep on going, but if you're just using, like in a room that has no windows, just using artificial light, if your bulbs aren't like sun bulbs or grow bulbs or something like that, you're not going to give the plants everything it needs. So it's going to kind of slowly suffer through that. You'll have about a good month or two where nothing really happens, and then it's going to go on a slow decline. They're very slow to react to anything, but it does happen over time. If you are someone who uses a lot of grow lights, like maybe you don't have a location that has a lot of windows, but you love growing plants and you have grow lights for all your other plants or your veggies or whatever you're doing, it totally will work. You just need to have the right intensity because they like a lot of bright light. So somewhere close to that lamp or whatever it is.
This guest seems to have a lot of their own Tillandsias and is asking, how often do you water the Tectorum versus the Ionanthus? And then also, they were taught that instead of a fan, you can also let the Tillandsias sit on an absorbent material like a towel or a sponge for a couple hours after soaking.
Yeah.
So that's a good tip. And then,
and I love hearing those different kinds of methods that people use, because everyone has different approaches to the problem, or just different approaches to taking care of them. So I think using an absorbent material is great because you're pulling that extra water away from the base of the plant while laying the top of it kind of dry naturally in the air. I think the fan is a great use. I actually don't have a fan for myself, so I don't actually do that one. I kind of just shake them and put them on a nice breezy area that they can kind of just dry naturally. When you're asking the Tectorum versus some of the other ones, like I said, the Tectorum can hold the water the best, or the most, I find, compared to some of the other ones. So I would say about every week and a half to 2 weeks, a full douse of this one is a good amount, where the other ones, like the Ionanthus and some of the other varieties, maybe once a week, and then some of the lighter ones, maybe once every 4 days or so. You can definitely do it a little bit more and a little bit less than that. Take that as more of like a guideline and whatever works for you. Some people's houses are more humid. Some people's houses are more dry, or you have heaters on. So it really can change from your environment. So it's kind of hard to give an exact date, but it's about almost double, I find, that this one can kind of sit without extra water. And you don't want to give this one too much water because it will rot out a little bit faster if it gets too much.
Yeah, that's really good information. A few different questions on the wreath. I think people are wanting to make a wreath, so we'll have to note to self, we'll do a wreath class next year. Okay, Taylor?
It's the wreath class. I love it. Yeah, so I think the wreaths are, like I was saying, a really fun way of doing it. And I, like I said, both use the glue and also the wiring. I personally love the wiring a little bit more. I'm a bonsai person, so I tend to play with the wire anyway. I like making little structures and little spirals for them to grow into, because I feel like it softly holds them. It doesn't really like constrict them, as well as it leaves the bottom open for aeration. But it's pretty easy to make if you have any kind of wreath or structure like this that you can kind of put some moss on it, wrap it in twine or in fishing line or anything like that as kind of decoration or little spots on it, and then using your Tillandsias and attach those to around the area and make nice ones. I had a bow on this before for the holiday season, but I took it off for the rest of the year because I didn't really want it.
Yeah, and you can, like Taylor said, you can use the Tilly Tacker, which is a silicone glue, and then also E6000 is another silicone-based glue. And somebody did ask about a glue gun, and those will burn, those will singe the plant. You don't want to use a glue gun, and it's not waterproof. The glue isn't waterproof.
Oh yeah, so the Tilly Tacker, the one that we have these in our stores. It's a silicone-based one, so it is water, it's not water absorbent or anything like that, so it won't like take in the extra water and kind of hold that. It will keep that away, and it's also the right kind of chemical structure, I guess, that it won't burn or disrupt the growth of the plant. I think a hot glue gun or some of the other kind of just basic like Elmer's glue or white glue or whatever it is, it probably would bring in another kind of chemical substance that the plant would reject, and it would be not a good one. So it's almost only recommended to use like the silicone based ones, or the ones that people recommend for Tillandsia.
And then when you're talking about something like a wreath or like mounting them to, you know, a cork or driftwood or whatever, you're gonna just basically be misting those plants, or do you ever just take the whole thing and put it in a bucket, or you know?
And that's, I think, the one of the bigger reasons that I showed that wreath where it kind of went to the wayside and kind of died away is it does add a little bit of an extra kind of difficulty when it is on a larger structure, or even like having this large one right here, the big monster Tillandsias that you have, or even like a cork board or like a large piece of wood, you do have to find a good way to water them. A strong, heavy dousing from a mister can work the same as a bucket of dunking it in. You just want to make sure that there's enough water on the surface for a short amount of time that it can really absorb it and pull it all in, and then it dries away. So you can definitely just mist them, but it takes a little bit more care and attention than if you were able to just like dunk them and let them fully hydrate. I watered this one last night because I saw it was a little bit dry when I brought it home to show off today. And
that's incredible. Yeah.
I ended up pretty much kind of taking a shower with it. I didn't have a bucket big enough, or I didn't want to fill up that much water. So I went to the shower with this, put it on light and the very soft kind of temperature, or like a medium temperature. And gave it a shower to kind of hydrate it up and let it soak up.
That's incredible. That's yeah, it's a really beautiful.
They're beautiful. They're definitely expensive. There's a lot of different varieties, and there's ones that, like, some of the ones I was talking about are a little bit cheaper and easier to get your hands on. And there are definitely little varieties out there that, although they maybe look a little bit similar, are specific or specialty, and their prices are definitely higher. So you kind of have to find what you like. And you're also asking about like having on corkboard. These small ones are really nice if you can actually get a Tillandsia growing off them. A lot of people sell pre-mounted ones, and they're really easy to just dunk straight into your water. You can, the cork will actually absorb a little bit of the water, and that's okay. It'll kind of dry out at the same rate, but you can dunk it all the way into your water location and let the plant hydrate up, and then pull it out and hang it back up, and you'll be okay. So if you can dunk it, you can. I mean, if you're putting a Tillandsia on anything that can't have water on it, it's not in the right space. It needs to be on a location that you can mist or you can water pretty easily. So I put this one a little while ago. It is now fully absorbed all the water. It hasn't opened up yet, but within about a day or so, this is going to open up and be a little bit flatter and a little bit healthier. When you water them, they go from a silver to a green because all those little trichomes absorb all that water, and they, instead of having that silvery sheen, they kind of go to more of a lighter green color until they dry out. So it's dripping all over me right now.
A couple more. Can you take a couple more and then we'll close it out? We're about an hour.
I have no idea what time it is, so yeah.
I know you just love talking about plants. So do I. How often do you recommend fertilizing, or is that something that you can do a little bit of fertilizer every time you water, or what do you typically do?
That's a good question. I don't have a set answer to that one that I usually would give, but probably about every couple of weeks is fine. You can probably put a little bit in every time you water, but that seems a little excessive and a little bit too much maintenance for me. So I would say every couple of waterings, like maybe every 4 weeks or every 2 months, giving it a little bit of fertilizer in the water will probably be enough for the plant. During the spring and summer, when we have longer days and warmer days, and the plants are probably growing a little bit more and maybe even flowering, especially if they're flowering, that's a good time to fertilize a little bit more often. And then in the winter time, like about right now, if you're watching it right now, this is the time of year that you kind of want to hold off on your fertilizing a little bit and let the plant just kind of do its natural growing during this time of the year and get a little bit stronger, and then maybe start fertilizing again. That's kind of like my thought process, but I'm sure there are some better ideas on like maybe exact times to fertilize. But I think if you just give it a little bit here and there, you're going to be giving it enough that they'll be happy.
Okay, just wanted to follow up with the guest that suggested about the absorbent material that you can dry them out once you water. They're saying that you want to be sure that the plant is upside down on the absorbent material, so then the water isn't gonna rot out.
That's a
so
good
that's
idea.
that's a good follow-up. Yeah.
I enjoy that tip. Whenever I water them, I always kind of have them upside down. You don't want the water to be sitting in the crown. That's an easy way for them to rot out from the center. So having them upside down, have the water naturally fall out or fall down the tips and then fall off the very ends of them is the best way for it. It's also how they actually grow in nature. Like I was talking about before, the Tillandsias aren't growing like this. They're not upright. I know we like displaying them like this, but they're not actually growing upright. They're often more a kind of downward sloping look, and they grow in clumps so that the water, when it rushes down them, it just trails off the tips of the leaves. So kind of trying to emulate nature is the best way usually to take care of plants in general.
Taylor, we've had several people just want a tour of your room, and so I think we need to plan that, or you have to put that on your Instagram or something, because you've got a lot of plants.
Pictures every once in a while, but it's ever changing. It's hard to get a perfect snapshot of it, but it's always kind of changing. This is definitely the easiest place for me to sit and kind of change around and display based on what we have. But I definitely have a bunch of plants and
a few plants, couple of plants.
But maybe we'll have to do a little tour on how you deal with a plant in a room full of plants or something like that.
There you go. Yeah, something.
Kind of class. So yeah.
Well, this has been super fun.
Thank you. Yeah. If you're interested in some of the other stuff, the Instagrams are good. The Slow Instagram is great. We've been doing a lot of stuff on there. Slow Gardens. And then I'm Taylored Plants, Taylored Plants. And if you want to see some of the stuff I'm doing.
Yeah, exactly. And then also this is being recorded, and the recording will be available on Tuesday and either on our website or also on our YouTube channel. If you subscribe to our YouTube channel, you'll get a notification once the video is posted. But this has been super fun and really informative. I know we didn't get to everyone's questions, but I do feel free to email me. And then, of course, our staff is, perfectly able and willing and enthusiastic too to help you with your questions. So feel free to bring them into the stores as well.
From growing all these plants, I've learned a lot. I did some reading, but honestly, the most learning I do is talking to all you guys from coming into the store and giving me your stories, as well as all the great employees I work with. All have different kinds of stories and different kinds of ideas. So a lot about what I talked today is that information that we always like to share. And so I would love to share it with you if you come to the store and talk with me.
So fun. And then definitely do check out, I am going to have our January, February lineup posted. I'm hoping in the next week or so. And like I said, I'm super excited about the classes, a lot of fun stuff coming up. And I hope to see you all next week. Somebody did ask about the Tillandsias in a glass container, and I'm going to do that next week.
Yeah, perfect. That's perfect.
For the terrarium.
I have them right behind me, but yeah.
I know it's like a tease, and yeah, exactly. So thank you all. Thank you so much, Taylor, for your time and expertise. Always appreciated.
No problem.
It's
lots of fun.
A nice day. So I think, if everyone can get outside maybe for a bit, that would be nice. Get in your garden. Enjoy your day. Thanks so much. Thanks again, Taylor.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Grow your Tillandsias. Goodbye.
Bye.